So I've always wanted to be the guy who gets to give away all the goodies, right? We call that the Oprah moment. And today, I'm happy to announce that you get a YouTube, and you get a YouTube, and you get a YouTube. YouTube's for everyone in this audience. Good afternoon, everybody. It's good to see your energy level still up. I like that. You've had a lot of learning thrown at you, and you're going to have some more thrown at you today. My name is Ikai Lan. I'm a member of the YouTube Developer Relations team. I'm based out of New York City. Today, we're going to be talking about best practices when working with mobile platforms and the YouTube API. Of course, this is when my remote just chooses to stop working. So we'll be talking about two platforms today. One of them is our friend, the Apple platform, iOS, and the other one's going to be Android. So just as a warning, this talk is going to favor Android a little bit more, and that's because there are more options available on Android platform if you're building and working with YouTube. That doesn't mean we don't love you, iOS users and developers. Thank you. It just means that right now there's more to talk about when it comes to Android. Okay. So for today's agenda, we're going to go over some general tips when just building mobile apps in general. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. This talk is broken into two major sections. One is about user experience during video playback, and the second part is going to be about authorization and making API calls. So we like to break these into two sections because these are two distinctly different libraries and APIs that YouTube provides. So these best practices, they come from talking to our partners in the field. And at the end of this session, we're going to have a Q&A where two honored guests are going to come up and help answer questions. They are Tom, who works on the mobile team in Android, and Geert. Hopefully I'm pronouncing his name correctly. He's a friend of ours who works at Flipboard, and they have a lot of things to share about how to best use YouTube on Android. Okay, so first off, just a very quick review of best practices when working with mobile platforms. Always follow the best practices of your platform. So for you Android and iOS developers, this means don't block the UI thread. Don't ever block the UI thread. Not for YouTube, not for me, not for your family. Just leave it open, do stuff in the background thread. And those are just the things to keep track of. So nothing I recommend today should supersede anything that you should be doing, should supersede anything that your platform provider recommends as best practice. Be aware of the YouTube terms of service. This is really important. The worst thing that can happen is you create a great service, you push it out there, and it turns out there's something you're doing that's not quite right. Now, fortunately, we're going to try to work with you to try to remedy the situation, but you don't want to be in that situation. Just check ahead of time, know what you can and can't do, and you should be clear. Okay? It's also good to understand the differences between form factors on mobile. I use mobile very loosely. But really, I'm talking not just about phones and phablets or giant phones. I'm talking also about 7-inch tablets and 10-inch tablets. So I'm going to plug a talk real quick. Tomorrow, there's going to be a talk at 3:30. It's called Designing Products for a Multi-Screen View, a YouTube Perspective. I highly recommend this, even if you're not currently a YouTube API developer, because we're going to share a lot of the insights we've picked up from just studying users who are using tablets and phones and how they use these devices. So I'm not going to cover any of that today, just a quick commercial. Okay, so let's start by talking about video playback. On iOS, we've got the following options. I told you we would get technical real fast. On iOS, we can play YouTube videos in the official YouTube application, and we can also play YouTube videos inside our applications inside a WebView using the iframe player. This has been available for some time now. And on iOS, what happens when you push the play button is this starts playing right there in the WebView, and you can maximize it in full screen video. Now, on Android devices, we have a few more options. On Android, we have one more option. We have the Android Player API, which released in December 2012. So if you haven't heard about this yet, definitely check it out, because the Android Player API is your video toolkit for working with YouTube. Not only can you play videos, which is, I would say, very central to the experience of experiencing YouTube, you also get information about the phone and what it can do in relation to YouTube and playing videos. You can manage intents. And intents are ways that your activities in Android communicate between each other. So that's for the non-Android developers. You also get playback event callbacks. So this is similar to callbacks you get when you're working with the JavaScript player, where you could say, execute some code when I've started playing, pause, stop, and so on and so forth. And you get these in native Java, so you can just integrate these with the classes that you're already using. Okay. So as a general best practice, if you're on Android and you're using YouTube, you probably want to use the Android Player API. We'll get into what this means, but right now, this is how you make a YouTube video play in your activity. In your layout XML file, you define this view. And this is a custom view that says, in here, play a YouTube video in this little piece of XML. And you could put this alongside your own controls, alongside your own look and feel. In the activity that inflates this view, you need to extend the YouTube-based activity and implement a few of the methods, such as the onInitializeListener. When you do this, you have a programmatic hook to the YouTube player where you can control it and get information about state. And that's all you need to do to start using the YouTube Player API in Android, as well as import a jar file. So let's start talking a little bit about best practices. As a best practice, it's good to gracefully degrade to the best player experience on the platform you're on. So what does this mean? In a perfect world, let's say we wanted to have a YouTube standalone player. Now, this code is from the YouTube Player API. You copy-paste this in, import the jar file, import your developer key, and you should be able to play YouTube videos. But that's a perfect world. Not all devices are going to have the latest version of YouTube. So you're going to have to fall over to your next best option. Now, depending on what your application does, this may mean a couple of different things. If your application just wants users to play YouTube videos, sometimes you just want to kick them out to the main YouTube application. So the second line of code is an example of how I can use the YouTube Player API to start a YouTube video in the main application. And the worst case scenario, YouTube is not available on your platform. So then you would fall back to the iframe Player API. Now, for any number of reasons, this is the last resort, but it is one that you might want to consider. Starting the YouTube application is very easy using the Player API. Using this line of code, you can create a play video intent, and just using start activity, you could start the intent that kicks you out to YouTube. And why would you do this instead of just creating an intent the normal way? Well, we'll talk about that in a second. And as a last resort, you can create an iframe. Now, for some of you taking pictures of the slides, these will be online later, so you can just copy that down that way. OK, so how does Graceful failover look like? We're going to walk through this line by line over the code to determine what your player on the current Android device can do, what it can't do, and just go and break through these different options. And again, these options are playing them natively in your activity, kicking out to the YouTube app, and playing them in an iframe. So first off, let's check if YouTube is installed. The Android Player API comes with a library called YouTube Intents. And using this library, using this class, you can say, is this thing even installed? And there's some Android devices where YouTube isn't already installed. So in those cases, we'll just break through and skip this block of code. But for most Android devices with Google Experience, the answer you'll get is yes. Now, the next thing we'll want to check is, can I play the YouTube video inside my activity? That's what this line of code here does, using the YouTube API service util. It looks like a long line of code, but it's really something you can just copy and paste. And if you can play the video inside your activity, we start an intent that says, just start something in standalone player. Now, standalone player is only one of many different options. You'll want to take a look at all of these options, and available in the samples app for the YouTube Player API. So what if you don't have the newest version of YouTube? What do you do then? Let's check for that. Let's check if YouTube is installed and if it can resolve a play video intent. Now, again, an intent is it's a question that says, can you please do this? It's a request. So you're saying, can you resolve the play video intent? If the answer is yes, this is true, and we execute the next line of code in which we start an activity where we just create a play video intent. And this starts the main YouTube activity. This starts the main YouTube player and plays your video. So you might not always want to play the video in the YouTube player, the main app. But there are lots of times when you do want to use the main YouTube app. So a good analogy here would be if you have a reviews application. For lots of review applications, you have a map right there in the application that shows you where the restaurant is. But a lot of users may want to click out and go to Google Maps or an alternate map application. That's the difference between using the player API to play the video inside your application and on YouTube. Don't rebuild the YouTube app. This is an anti-pattern that we don't recommend, right? You're replicating code, and in many of these cases, you're probably better off just sending a user to the main YouTube application. So here's another best practice that we picked up talking to another one of our partners, providing intermediary screen during loading. And what does this mean? Well, let's do a case study. This is of one of our launch partners last year. The launch partner is Skimble. Skimble is an Android application that loads exercise app videos from YouTube and plays them inside your app. It puts them in a loop, and it times you to say, you should be doing 100 push-ups or 500 push-ups. I guess it's good for you if you're Superman. But realistically, it loops the video for about 10 seconds or 10 or 20 seconds, moves on to the next exercise, and so forth. So a quick reminder, I mentioned the terms of service. One thing that the terms of service do not allow you to do is do overlays or draw on top of videos. And there are good reasons why we do this, but this is something to keep in mind. And if you do try to put an overlay on top of a video, it will stop the playback. But that doesn't mean you can't draw on top of the area where you're loading the video before the video started playing. So what does Skimble do? Skimble, you go ahead and click Start in their Fitness Flow application. Now, while they're loading the video, and depending on what kind of network situation you may have, this could take a couple of seconds. So they don't want people staring at a black box for a while with just a loading screen, right? They want to show the user that something's happening and keep them engaged. So what Skimble does is they draw an overlay, which is some kind of text. In this case, they're saying, you are a work of art, right? Keep you motivated and keep you working hard. And as soon as they get notified that the video has started playing, and this is through a callback, they take the overlay away, and the video begins playing as normal. Player callbacks are very easy to register. In the Android Player API, what you do is you create a player listener class, and you set a playback event listener to the player. So this might be a little bit confusing, but I'll just repeat myself. You have a player instance, and this represents the actual YouTube video player. You call a method to set a listener, and you set the listener. And in the listener, this listener has multiple methods you need to define: on stopped, on playing, on pause. And in these methods, you define the hooks of what you want the player to do. In this case, I am taking the overlay, which is saying you are a work of art, you're doing a great job, and I'm hiding it. There's a lot of different callbacks. If you've ever worked with the JavaScript player before, you know that there's a full range of things you could do when you're playing a YouTube video and events that you can listen for. And these are all available via the Java Android Player API as well. So note that this is also available if you're working in iOS. It's just that these are going to be in JavaScript. And you're going to have a JavaScript bridge between your Objective-C code and the JavaScript code that's working with the iOS player. OK, and just one quick thing, because we've been asked about this a lot. You don't need to implement your own caption system. The YouTube Player API will respect captions. And in these two screenshots, what you're seeing is that one of these is in the official YouTube app, and the other one is just in the player inside the Flipboard application saying, hey, play the captions. There'll be a button that says CC where you can hide and show captions. So you don't need to do this. You don't need to build your own caption functionality. OK, now let's switch gears a little bit and talk about authorization and authentication. A quick public service announcement. If you are using the data API, and you're probably using V2 of the API, we highly encourage you to move to V3 of the API. This is where we're going to be investing a lot of our effort. If you're using V2 and you can't get off it for the foreseeable future, please don't use client login, right? Please use OAuth when you can. Now, when do you need authentication when you're making API calls? So think about when you're on YouTube.com. When you're searching or playing for videos, you don't need to be logged in. You can just search and play right there. But when you want to start managing playlists, uploading videos, just editing things, making comments, you need to be logged in. And these are things that you need to use OAuth to authenticate your user for, to authorize your application. Those of you that have worked with OAuth on the web before will probably recognize this picture. The way OAuth works is you're on a site, maybe it's ikaiscoolsite.com. I'm saying, hey, I want access to your YouTube account. So I forward you to a page on google.com, youtube.com, and you say, do you want to give Ikai's cool site access to your YouTube account? You say yes, and you're redirected back to ikaiscoolsite.com. I get a token, and using this token, I can make API calls as you. I don't need to store your email. I don't need to store your password. I just need to store your token, and I can make API calls. On mobile, it's not too different, but some of the processes can be a little streamlined. On iOS, we can open up a WebView that says enter in your Google account details, and if you're using a one-time password because you're using two-factor, you enter in your one-time password and you're logged in, and you can authorize the app. If you're not using two-factor authentication for your Google account and you haven't heard about it yet, please look it up and use it today. You'll want to do this. It's good for you. You'll keep your stuff secure. On Android, we don't even need you to enter in your email and password again because we have an authorization service. What I'm showing you guys here is Google Play services checking for your account on your phone and asking you for permission to give your account details to the YouTube application. Play services for Android makes it very easy to manage tokens. Once you start working with this, you don't have to manage emails or passwords. And the token will work very seamlessly with the Java v3 API client. So authorizing a channel looks like this. This is all the code it takes to authorize a channel in an Android activity using Play services. Using Google AuthUtil class, I'm saying, hey, let's get a token. You pass it a context and what are called scopes. A scope is the range of APIs that you want to access on behalf of a user. You get back a token, and you can start making API calls on behalf of the user. But let's say this user has not given you authorization yet. What do you need to do? You need to catch this exception. And this is all documented in our samples as well as on our site. Once you catch this exception gives you back an exception class where you can fetch an intent that starts the authentication process, right? You'll see it in this next line of code. I have a getIntent method. This returns an Android intent. I just call start activity. And once this returns, I attempt to get the token and make the API call again. Authorization on iOS, it's going to involve a little bit more user action. But Google has released a couple of libraries to at least make this easier on your part. The two libraries are the Google Plus platform for iOS, as well as the kind of lower level library that the Google Plus platform is built on top of. And the lower level library is called GTM-OAuth2. And what this does is, I know you can't see this code, but this is just the getting started code. It manages the tokens for you. It creates a WebView that says, hey, log in with your Google credentials, and I'll give this application a token that it can use to make API calls. OK. So those are the basics around authorization. Now, in YouTube, one of the tips that we have is sometimes you might want to help the user create a channel if they don't already have a YouTube channel. So a YouTube channel is not the same thing as a Google account. A Google account is what you get when you sign up for Gmail. You sign up for Gmail, you have a Google account, you can search, get search history, a calendar, and get access to a whole range of other services. Now, a YouTube channel is necessary for uploading videos and managing playlists and doing a few other things that you need to do on YouTube. You can have a Google account without having a YouTube channel. And this can be initially confusing, but once you get the hang of working with this, it's not that big of a deal. So here I'm showing you what it looks like to create a channel on a mobile device. If a user is forwarded to a page, the user logs in, and the user says, do I want to create a channel, yes or no? Yes, create it with my real name, or give it an alias. So you're not able to make certain YouTube API calls without having a channel. And these API calls are things like uploading a video. Think of it this way. You can't have a TV show unless you have a TV channel. It's the same thing with YouTube. You need a YouTube channel to be able to upload videos. And there are two ways that we could check for this. This is the lazy way of checking. And the lazy way of checking, we just try to make the API calls anyway. So one of the API calls that you need a channel to make is playlist management, right? Channels have playlists, which are lists of videos that go in some certain order. So I'm trying to make this API call here, and this throws an exception, because I don't have a channel yet. This is a brand new account that doesn't have a YouTube channel. The exception is of the type, the Google JSON response exception. This is a standard exception type for many of Google's APIs. We catch this exception, and let's fetch the details about the errors. So this could have some number of errors is greater than 0. We iterate through this. It's a list of errors, and we get the reason. The reason, get reason is the method, and we just check to see if the reason is the YouTube sign-up required. And if this is the reason why we can't make this API call, we can recover from this, right? We can, if we have an activity for creating a channel, we just fire off the activity and we're ready to go. That's the lazy way of checking. So what if we want to check eagerly? What if we want to know ahead of time so we don't always have to deal with this exception? So the way that we can do this is by making a different API call. And this code is really small, but we'll blow it up right now. First off, some of this is semi-boilerplate code. This is the code you need to write when you're working in Java using the v3 client. And a lot of this code will map directly to the Objective-C client. So both of those clients can do similar things when we're talking about the data API. We set the access token. And that's this thing we talked about earlier. You get this back using either place services or GTM OAuth. We create an instance of the YouTube client. This is, we have to pass an HTTP transport, and a Jackson Factory is a JSON processor. Now let's go ahead and make the actual API call. And the API call that we're making is to list the current user's channels, right? Let's see if this user has any channels. Once we get back this information, we're only asking for status. So we're saying get back my channels and get back, all I want to know is the status of my channels. So if I don't have any channels, what this will return is a status under the field is linked. And we check to see if this is true or false. And if this is true, that's all we need to know. We don't ever need to check for channels again. Once a user links a Google account to a channel, they cannot unlink these two. So once you know that this is true, you don't need to do this check ever again. If this is true, go on, right? Go on with your day. If this is false, well, figure out how you can help your users create a channel. And maybe this means doing it in a WebView. Maybe this means opening up a link in a browser. And maybe this just means sending them directly to the YouTube application on their phone where they can create a channel. So again, this is Java code, but this will map directly to the Objective-C client as well. So here's one possible solution. And I'm hesitating because I don't want to recommend this as a best practice, but this is one way that we've seen some people implement this. Some people, what they will do is they will create a WebView. And in this WebView, they will take them through the channel creation flow. When they're done, they check the URL, and they see if the URL matches the channel creation success URL. And if it does match, then you're ready to go, right? The channel is created. Try making the API call again. OK. So that's what I have for you guys today. And let's do a quick, just very quick recap of what we've talked about so far. We've talked about Graceful failover. In a perfect world, all the devices that your users are using are the newest devices with the newest version of YouTube. Right? We have to deal with loading latency. This can take a few seconds. Let's give the user something to look at. And let's keep in mind all the different callbacks we have to keep their playback experience interesting. When you're using a data API, use the v3 API. That's public service announcement. And for authorization, some of the easiest ways you could do this are using Play Services, or on iOS, using the Google Plus platform or GTM OAuth 2. Those are libraries you can use. And those are Google-provided libraries. Understand the difference between a Google account and a channel and what that relationship is. And again, a user can have a Google account without having a channel. You might want to help them create one or just guide them through creating one. So that's what I have for you guys today. And for any specific questions, I want to thank a few people that helped out with this talk. One of them is Tom. He works on the YouTube team. One of them is Hert over here. He works on a Flipboard team. And another guy is John, who couldn't be here today. So with that, I'd like to move into some Q&A about mobile and working with mobile and the YouTube platform. So I'm going to invite up these guys. I have a microphone for you guys. So if you can, please ask your questions at the microphone over here. This is a recorded session. And come on, Anton. I didn't know, we have a special guest. He used to work on our mobile stuff. He's the big expert. This is Anton. Hi.
What the heck, I'll start. There you go. Larry Lieberman from Uvu. So we've got, we're a video chat platform and Android app now, and we have really successfully built YouTube playing capabilities within Uvu video chats on our PC client. So the 8 or 9 people on the call can all watch the same YouTube video simultaneously. We have not been as successful building that product for Android. Is there a way to reach out and get deeper level support? Since I'm sure it's not a question we can work through now. I mean, how does one get deeper into more sophisticated problems in development for Android?
So is your question, what are the different support options available for people building with YouTube?
There you go. Yes, please.
YouTube, the YouTube platform doesn't have what's called a paid support channel. So we do most of our support through community channels, such as Stack Overflow is one place where the team is constantly monitoring. And the other place we look at is we have an issues tracker, but that's more for reporting issues, whether serving or bugs. So.
All right, so not really any support yet for the kind of level problems we're having.
If you're looking for a type of support with an SLA, that's not something that we provide.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, hello.
Hi.
Well, you talk about authentication, helping the user create a channel and all that, but any recommendations about battery usage and improvements on that? If I am creating an app using the YouTube API, probably it's going to consume a lot of battery. Do you have any guidelines for that?
Any guidelines? So to repeat the question, do we have any guidelines for working with the YouTube API?
Being friendly with battery usage.
Being friendly with
battery usage.
Battery.
Yeah.
Well, power saving?
I don't have any specific recommendations. The fact is, when you're playing a video, the CPU is busy all the time. So the best practice I could recommend would be identical to those that you get from the general Android developer community. There's nothing specific to YouTube. But the fact is, video-related apps are going to be more power-hungry than other apps.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
Just to add to that, the YouTube API also allows you to destroy the instance of the player view you're working with and to release the resources. So generally, when your user is done viewing the video and you know they're not going to watch a new video very soon because they just started one instance, you can just kill that view and clean up resources. Yeah.
Right, and when it comes to API calls, just follow the platform best practices. There's a section on developers.android.com about when to use the 3G radio and batching. A lot of this, unfortunately, wouldn't apply to the player API because the radio needs to be on the whole time while it's streaming the video.
So you said that for Android player API, we have to extend the activity to YouTube base activity?
Yes.
Can we do something with the fragments too? Or it's always...
Yes, there's a different base class. Ikai didn't put it in his presentation. There's a different base class for fragment usage, and there's also for support fragments if you want to work on older platforms that don't have fragments natively.
Thank you.
Hi, I had a question regarding live streaming support on mobile. So, yeah, we can use the YouTube APIs, we can use YouTube embeds, but what is the standard on live streaming support across Android? Because Android is a platform where we have the most trouble with live streaming.
So I think it's supported on Honeycomb MR2 and above, so 3.1, if I remember correctly. And the player API supports it.
Yes.
You can, if you use the Google I/O companion app, it's actually implemented there to live stream all the sessions that are live streamed at Google I/O. So yeah, we do support that.
And we have another session tomorrow about live streaming where I don't want to give away the secrets too much, but you might see some kind of live streaming from Android. Ooh. See, I'm sorry, I'm just taking away all of your surprise tomorrow, aren't I? It's his session, it's my teammate's session. Definitely come to that, but you're right. It's just a standard player when it comes to playing. When it comes to broadcasting, it's a little bit different.
But YouTube, if you use YouTube live events, for example, you're sending RTMP. So ideally, you can support Flash and Android earlier Androids did have Flash built in. So why wouldn't you support Flash-based live streaming on older versions of Android and HLS on the newer versions, rather than not support live stream on older versions at all?
Is this a question specific to Flash or live streaming?
Live stream as such. Because live streaming, if you have a YouTube live event, the live streaming input is you take the input as RTMP, and then you do the encoding in the cloud and provide HLS for the mobile platforms. So if, since older versions of Android had Flash built in, you can provide live streaming support across all Android platforms if older versions would just do Flash and the newer versions do HLS. But everybody I've talked to YouTube, the answer has been like, we support live streaming post 3.2. Why is that?
I think it has to do in general with supporting Flash. I mean, when you even look at Adobe, even Adobe is stopping to support Flash. So it gets really difficult to support what's essentially a legacy architecture. If you have any more questions about live streaming, though, I'd love to talk to you after the talk. We have our live streaming experts in this row right here.
Perfect, yeah.
Hi, my name is David. In version 2 of the data API, there were some feeds for, say, top-rated videos or most viewed videos, but they're no longer existent on the version 3 data API. But I do see some channels that are more like most popular, for example, most popular channels. But for certain regions, say, for example, the region that I'm in, the Taiwan region, the most popular channel, I can see when I click on the most popular channel for Taiwan on the YouTube website, I can see a lot of videos there. But when I use the version 3 data API to call for video listing in that channel, there's nothing. So I'm just wondering why there is an inconsistency between the desktop version and the data API that you guys are providing.
I think when you're moving between API versions, you're always going to have these inconsistencies, and we've been working to identify these gaps so that if this is a very legitimate gap that we need to, this is a legitimate use case. So for instance, we need to figure out how we can replicate the same functionality in version 3 and make that available to you. So definitely talk to us afterwards, and we'll see where our progress is on this. We've been keeping track of this one.
Okay. Yeah. Another question I have, I noticed that for the YouTube player API on Android, you guys have to extend some base class for either activity or fragment, but for a lot of applications, we need to use common libraries like the Action Bar Sherlock library, which uses which itself uses a base class for activities or fragments. And so in Java, you can't really extend both classes at the same time. So like, how do you resolve that kind of problem? Like, if you have an activity that you want to be using the, say, Action Bar Sherlock library and using the YouTube player API at the same time, how do you resolve that?
I think we all have an answer, and it's all going to be different from all 4 of us.
All right, now let me talk about how we did it for Flipboard, because we can't extend the YouTube API activity because you already have our own activity does certain things. So in your case, you use the Sherlock activities, you can use it either. So we use the fragment, and we just insert it in our own custom view. Like as you saw on the slides, we have the top bar with the social interactions, and you have the YouTube view. So the player view is actually inserted by a fragment. And we use the support fragment because we support down to Froyo. So those are your two options, like the fragment or the support fragment that is supported with the YouTube API.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you.
The short version is fragments. Fragments all the way down.
Hello, I'm Ethan. So I know there's like a chorously limits of number of API call I can make, right?
Which API call?
The data API, there's like a chorously limit of number of APIs I can call per day.
Oh, right. There's a quota.
Yeah.
Yes.
So what happened if I made an app that's like pretty popular and everybody just keep calling you? Like it goes over the limits, and how should I overcome this restrictions?
So when you do hit an API limit, let us know. There's a place to contact us on developers.google.com/YouTube. But your quota is going to be, quota works in a couple of different tiers, right? So if it's one account on one API key on one device and one IP address making a ton of API calls, that's going to have the smallest quota. Now, per API key, you're going to have a relatively large quota. And when it's being used by many users, it's not often that we see quotas being tripped in that situation because the quota is fairly high.
Okay.
So once you do hit that limit, though, if you have a very, very popular application, like for instance, Flipboard is pretty popular. What are you at? 20 billion users now? There aren't even 20 billion people in the world. I'm just throwing a number out there, and they haven't hit a quota.
Oh,
have you?
Yeah. So I think we actually have a couple of keys that were brought to us by some of the contacts that Ikai was talking about. So if your application is reaching certain limits, then you can contact them and they can help you out with setting up specific keys. Alternatively, if it's data calls that you can make from the client for just that specific user, then you can also use their key, their token to do the data call. So you don't run onto data limits on your, like quota limits on your own key.
They do a server-side call. That's one of the differences.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi.
Hi.
In some cases, videos are not available on mobile platform, or they're not available for playback in third-party applications. How do we go about detecting this ahead of time, and what is a prescribed experience for those cases?
There is an API call on the data API that there's a field that will tell you if these videos are available or not. But a lot of the reason why this wasn't available in older versions of Player is because older versions of Player couldn't do, for instance, TrueView, or they couldn't do monetization. So it's been a while since I've seen a video that couldn't be played on a mobile platform. And because we're now updating the versions on both iOS and Android, this is something that I'm seeing far less frequently. But it's something that you can detect in the data API.
And regarding the second part of the question, where the videos are not available for playback in third-party applications?
In third-party applications, that I believe that is also available in the API. The API will show you the playback restrictions. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, so we've got to wrap this up. We've got about a minute left. Thank you guys all for coming out today, and let's have a round of applause for our guest speakers. Thank you guys.